Hi there, I'm Yvette Whitwam of Beanstalk HR, which is an HR consultancy that mainly deals with small to medium-sized businesses who have, a growing amount of employees perhaps, but don't have that internal HR resource. So that's what my presentation is aimed at today, those businesses who might be calling upon services like mine. With the change in government and Labour's proposed new deal for work, there's loads to take on in the employment front, loads of change that's going to happen, and it's going to mean change for all employers. However, I'm going to say, don't panic, keep calm. I've had lots of questions and worries already from clients, and a couple have said it's really putting them off employing people. Employing people is a huge step for any business. It is a big responsibility, but if it's done right, your workforce is your biggest asset and it will continue to be so. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. The changes ahead, what impacts that could mean for your business, and what you can do to get prepared and hopefully get ahead by actually seeing some of these changes as opportunities. So first of all, I'm going to ask you to put your faith in me and that wealth of evidence that's out there from research and HR experts. I've got 30 years experience in people management. I've got 20 in HR in various positions, different organisations. I'm a CIPD member. I'm qualified to level 7. I'm an absolute HR geek and I keep myself up to date with trends and research and obviously new employment law. I've been running my own small business for a year and a half, and most of my clients are small businesses, so I absolutely understand the unique challenges that small businesses have. I'm very passionate about ensuring that small businesses, small employers can leverage the advantages of great people practice. So, as a small business owner, you might be thinking, a lot of this just isn't for me. So you're not going to need to report on gender, disability and ethnicity pay gaps, for example. But you can bet your dollar that the big successful companies out there who will need to do this reporting will be doing that as part of an inclusion and diversity strategy that's also going to give them the competitive edge in the labour market. And that might well be the pool that you're fishing from for your staff. So I've listed here some key elements of employment that have been shown to improve business outcomes, and I've seen evidence of this firsthand too. So those will be then inclusive workplaces and diverse workforces, cultures that genuinely support well-being and safety and development for all, employee involvement and participation, financial well-being and job security, and robust people management processes which are consistently and fairly applied. Now, I'm not really here today to talk about these keys to success specifically, but there's such a lot of research that I could talk about if I was. And I would urge you to go out and Google if you've got the time or the inclination. But for now, for this presentation, trust me, whether your workforce is large or small, these things matter, and there are steps that you can put in place to get ahead. So let's go back then to the changes that you can expect to see. There's a raft of proposed changes from the new government, directly and indirectly affecting employment. There are 40 bills that are expected to be presented in the first 100 days. I think these include things like the National Wealth Fund, which will play a central role in the government's industrial strategy making. It'll support good jobs. The Planning Infrastructure Bill, which will accelerate house building and infrastructure delivery. The Great British Energy Bill, which will take a stake for the British people in projects and supply chains, accelerating technologies of the future and reaping benefits of clean power, securing Britain at the front of the global race for technology. It all sounds great if it happens. Hopefully it will. And last week we heard from Charles himself how, taken together, these policies will enhance Britain's position as a leading industrial nation and enable the country to take advantage of new opportunities that can promote growth and wealth creation. I'm sure I've not done that quite as eloquently as His Majesty, but giving him a go. So There are some particular bills that are affecting employment. So there's the Skills England Bill, which is going to create a new partnership with employers to hopefully bring the country to the position that it needs to be with the right skills for the jobs that we've got. There's the Draft Equality, Race and Disability Bill. And then crucially, there's the Employment Rights Bill, which is pretty massive. So it's not clear if Labour will table the Employment Rights Bill immediately or consult on a draft first. But there is a promise to introduce this bill within the first 100 days. So by the 12th of October, we should have sight of it. Before becoming law, bills need to go through both houses of Parliament, and they could be amended along the way. And this will take several months. Even after bills become law, many measures still won't take effect immediately because they may need secondary legislation or codes of practice or both to put them into place. So what we do see with employment law is that ACAS will release alongside some codes of practice, and those are to help people to not just stick to the law, but to do it in the best way, and tribunals take those into account. So if you ended up in a tribunal and they found that you'd not followed the ACAS code on whatever particular thing it was, then there's potentially uplifts in fines and things. So well worth familiarising yourself with those when they are published. So examples, the introduction of the day one unfair dismissal right, that's probably one of the biggest changes on the horizon, and it will need an updated or new ACAS code of practice, which will need to be consulted on. What is behind these employment changes then? So as I've already highlighted, plans to improve standards of employment are not just about the right thing to do, but there's very much an economic drive. So, for example, Labour say that economists across the board recognise the vital role that workers' voices and unions have in delivering a strong economy and rising living standards. They also recognise that real living wage growth has flatlined and that day one protections will enable people to switch jobs, which is associated with higher wages and productivity growth. So if you imagine, when people are moving around jobs, that tends to be the time that they manage to bag themselves a pay rise. And it also, all that mixing up of skills helps with productivity. They've also acknowledged that there's been an increase in people in less secure forms of work, like 0 hours contracts, and that the number of workers inactive due to long-term sick is at an all-time high of 2.8 million people, while current sick pay disproportionately disadvantages low earners. So currently there's a low earnings threshold. So you might be sick and not get any statutory sick pay, but everybody waits for 4 days before they do get a statutory sick pay. The national gender pay gap still stands at 14.3%. Most ethnic minority groups earn less than the white British group. And while there's been a growth in employment rates for disabled people in recent years, disabled people have, on average, lower incomes than non-disabled people. So Labour wants to tackle all that. And worryingly, 1 in 10 women who work during the menopause have left a job due to their symptoms, and a quarter of all reported sexual harassment in England and Wales takes place in the workplace. So again, issues that they're keen to tackle with new legislation. Let's look then at some of the bills and the plan to make work pay in more detail, starting with the Employment Rights Bill, some of the things that are in that. So, number 1, exploitative 0 hours contract will be banned. So what will be classed as exploitative is yet to be seen, and Labour have already kind of acknowledged that 0 hours can be very beneficial mutually to both parties. But if these are contracts that you use, you will need to review them in line with whatever is decided. So get your eye on that if you've got any 0 hours contracts. The Workers' Predictable Terms and Conditions Act 2023, giving workers the right to request a more predictable contract, was expected to be brought in September this year. The government could bring this in as a first step in ensuring everyone has the right to have a contract that reflects the number of hours they regularly work. So that could still happen. Fire and rehire tactics will be banned. A new statutory code has just been published, but that doesn't have much teeth and it stops short of a complete ban. Parental leave and sick pay will be made a day one right. So that's as soon as someone starts employment, they'll be entitled to those statutory rates. And potentially with huge impact, so will the protection from unfair dismissal. So currently, ordinary unfair dismissal cannot be claimed in the first 2 years, which gives employers some leeway to bypass being ACAS compliant and using those dismissal processes. It's thought, though, that there will be an ability for employers to still use probationary periods to assess new hires. There'll be a need for more robust probationary processes, and to my mind, too many employees currently do nothing with the probationary stage. You know, it's something that you should be having a robust process in place already, to be honest. There's also been mention of increasing time limits on employment claims to 6 months from the current 3. Now, this could increase or decrease the number of claims. It's, I guess, yet to be seen. Perhaps having an extra 3 months to put your claim in, find a new role and move on will result in more easily settled claims or less claims for unfair dismissal. But there's also talk of removing the cap on compensation for unfair dismissal. So maybe not. It could go the other way. We'll have to see. No one's got a crystal ball. Statutory sick pay will be more available to workers, so employers must get on top of managing absence. Another thing that, in my experience, often doesn't get dealt with until there's a real issue, and really should be from the get-go. So part of the bill is also to make flexible working the default from day one for all workers. Again, not too sure how default will work, but for some employers, this is really going to mean a huge culture change. They're going to strengthen protections for new mothers by making it unlawful to dismiss a woman for 6 months after her return to work, except in specific circumstances. Again, we'll wait to see what those circumstances are. I expect it'll be around redundancy, where currently pregnant women or on maternity must be offered any alternative employment you have anyway. They're going to set up a new Fair Work agency to help enforce workplace rights. And hopefully this will kind of level up the playing field because, let's face it, unscrupulous employers are rarely held to account and therefore probably feel free to excuse themselves from the duties that most fair employers want to abide by anyway. So hopefully that will level the field a bit for all employers. And then in establishing a fair pay agreement in the adult social care sector, the government will look at to what extent such agreements could benefit other sectors. The bill includes the reinstatement of the School Support Staff Negotiating Body, which aims to establish national terms and conditions and career progression routes and fair pay rates. They're going to update trade union legislation and simplify the process of statutory recognition, and that will inevitably mean that employers have less opportunity to dodge the duties that they already have to consult with and inform their workers. And in addition, they promise to deliver a genuine living wage that accounts for the cost of living and remove the discriminatory age bands to ensure that every adult worker benefits. So it seems likely that a new cost of living minimum wage will take effect in April next year, but it's unclear if Labour will delay the abolition of the 18 to 20 age band to give businesses more time to adjust. There are other bills. So there's the Skills England bill. Labour say the aim of Skills England will be to bring together businesses, providers, unions, mayoral combined authorities or MCAs, and national government to ensure that we have the highly trained workforce that England needs and that it will deliver on their manifesto commitment to simplify and improve the skills systems, ensuring the supply of skills needed for the economy and breaking down barriers to opportunity. So yeah, I've been reading some really interesting stats recently about, numbers of vacancies that aren't being filled, not because there aren't people out there wanting to work, but because there aren't the right skills out there. So this is so important and good that the government are getting on top of it, I guess. The draft Equality, Race and Disability Bill will mirror measures in the Equality Act 2010, relating to equal pay and gender pay reporting. So there will be mandatory ethnicity and disability pay reporting for employers with 250 plus employees. The government believes that surfacing pay gaps will enable companies to constructively consider why they exist and how to tackle them. And this is where businesses that have capacity to do so, will put themselves in a competitive advantage in the labour market by doing that work. So it is where small businesses looking at how they can improve equality of opportunity throughout their own business and appropriate, business appropriate initiatives that work for you. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay. So while not specifically set out in the King's Speech in reference to the Employment Rights Bill, Labour have already set out several other changes in their plan to make work pay. They will strengthen redundancy rights and protections. They will bring in a right for employees to raise collective grievances to ACAS. They will introduce a new duty on employers to inform all new employees of their right to join a union as part of the written statement of particulars, or in layman's terms, the contract, that all new workers already receive or should when starting a new job. They will conduct a review of parental leave within the first year of government. They will clarify the law and entitlement on bereavement leave for all workers. They will bring in the right to switch off. That's, I guess, to combat that kind of always-on culture that hybrid and home working has spawned. They will look at AI and new technologies in the workplace in terms of kind of safeguarding against kind of an invasion of privacy. And they'll require employers with more than 250 employees to produce menopause action plans, and they'll publish guidance on measures to consider. Labour will also require employers to create and maintain workplaces and working conditions free from harassment and strengthen the legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. Now, the duty to take reasonable steps, minus the all, is already due to come into force in October. They also aim to ease the burden on courts by bringing employment tribunals up to standard, further digitising employment tribunals and providing quicker and more effective resolutions. So, given the current backlog and the potential upsurge in claims, this absolutely needs to be a priority, in my opinion. So let's hope they manage to do that. Labour have also pledged to reduce the high net migration levels seen in recent years, and undoubtedly this will affect employment. Their strategy aims to reduce UK businesses' long-term reliance on overseas workers by upskilling the local labour force, which we talked about already, particularly in critical sectors such as construction, IT, health, social care, and engineering. Employers can expect to see the introduction of a growth and skills levy to reform the current apprenticeship levy, with businesses allowed to use up to 50% of their levy contributions to fund training through routes other than apprenticeships. So I think that route's kind of been seen to the apprenticeship route as not perhaps worked as well as hoped. So they're going to broaden that out to other forms of training. Labour has also said that it will require different parts of government to put in place a skills improvement plan in those sectors with the high numbers of migrant workers. And it's then expected that those sponsoring workers in sectors with skills shortages, such as adult social care, will be required to comply with government workforce plans and fair pay agreements. Now, whilst it's currently unconfirmed, there may also be a reintroduction of the resident labour market test, which requires employers to show that they've first tried to recruit a UK citizen in the UK before hiring migrant workers who require sponsorship. So that would lengthen out the recruitment process and probably cause operational difficulties, particularly in industries where the ability to sponsor migrant workers quickly is key. So now we come to what for me is the big one, and that's the elevation of rights generally for all workers. So Labour plan to move towards a single status of worker to replace the existing two-tier employee and worker status system. This will impact any employers who employ under atypical contracts, so anything other than employment. Employment status is determined by the real nature of the working relationship. Simply calling someone self-employed or putting that term in writing in a contract does not necessarily mean that the individual will legally be classed as self-employed. So there's been some notable cases that have come to tribunal in recent years where assumed self-employed people have been found to be workers and therefore been owed pay for holidays, etc. So the Uber drivers is a great example. So with more scrutiny on these definitions and further rights for those who are employed, we may see more similar cases. Part of the enforcement body's responsibilities could also be to monitor this regardless of claims. So employers are going to need to be really careful. So I've put together this little infographic to show the effect this will have when paired with those enhanced rights that employees are going to have. So currently we've got 3 broad categories. We've got employees, workers, and the self-employed. So what's the difference then? An employee provides a personal service where the employer controls the work and both parties are mutually obliged in terms of providing and carrying out work. Employees have all the statutory employment rights subject to those qualifying periods, e.g., the right not to be unfairly dismissed after 2 years, qualifying periods for sick pay, etc. Workers provide a personal service under control of the employer, but there's no mutual obligation to provide or accept work. So casual and flexible working relationships, really like the 0 hours contracts, although 0 hours contracts can be employment, so just watch that one. Workers have core statutory employment rights from day one. So, for example, national minimum wage, paid holidays, but they don't have the full set like an employee. Now, with the self-employed, there is a contract for services between the client, so not the employer, the client, and the individual who is in business for themselves. So they might be a limited company or, self-employed, sole trader, whatever. They have control over how, if, where, and when they work. And generally, they also have the right of substitution, which is the right to send someone to do the work in their place. They have very few rights, some health and safety rights, the right not to be discriminated against, but very little. So under Labour's plan to merge employees and workers, then more people will be entitled to statutory employment rights. And again, the levels of those rights and benefits will also increase under separate plans. This transition will be complex because in terms of employment legislation as well as aligning with the tax frameworks. So there's bound to be a lot of consultation before this comes to fruition. Also, new rights for the self-employed have also been promised, including action to tackle late payments. So yay for getting paid on time. Look forward to that. So how, might you ask, does a small employer navigate all of this? Start with identifying the areas of change that will affect you and your business, and then make a plan. So don't get hung up too much on what it means to have a people plan. For a large business, that might be a complex set of short, medium, and long-term strategic aims. But for a micro business, it could be as simple as a list. The important thing is that the things on it are aligned with the changing employment law landscape and your wider business aims, and also kind of horizontally aligned so that all your people stuff fits together nicely and works well together. How does that work practically? Let's take a look at some key areas. First of all, you need to satisfy yourself that your current contracts for employment and services reflect the true relationship, particularly if you have self-employed people working for you. If that's put under scrutiny, how would it hold up? A truly self-employed person forfeits the right to statutory employment rights like holiday pay, maternity, paternity, redundancy, minimum wage, etc. Therefore, the relationship to be one of genuinely of client and service provider, the self-employed person should decide for themselves things like how much to charge and what services they are to perform. So that was one of the things that fell down with the Uber drivers, isn't it? They couldn't set their rates. In most cases, they will have substitution rights, so will in theory be able to send an appropriate substitute in their place under the contract. When these statuses are contested, an employment tribunal will take into account many factors, and that will include things like who pays their tax, who's liable for their insurance, who bears the legal and financial risks involved in the business, who provides and maintains equipment or uniform, whether the person is subject to company rules and policies, whether the person's managed for misconduct or performance. And again, that was another thing with the Uber drivers. They were managed on a kind of star rating thing. And the tribunal felt that was, more along with the worker than a self-employed person. Other things like whether the person is fully integrated into the workforce. So having self-employed people attend your team meetings, training, social events, etc., can all contribute, and things like having a company email profile, having their profile on your website, etc., so that they look like an employee. If it looks and sounds like an employee, it's probably an employee. So yeah, there's no one defining feature, and it'd be looked at as a whole. So my advice would be make sure that you have clarity on these types of relationships before any of these new changes come in. You should also audit your stated terms, benefits and policies regularly. For example, in April just gone, there's been some new laws that have come in that have affected them. And obviously there's going to be loads more. But start with ensuring that everyone has a written statement of employment particulars. And that's, layman's terms contract. It's a legal requirement that so many employers still don't fulfill. Not having it written down doesn't mean that a term hasn't been implied by custom and practice. So a lack of a written contract can really cause headaches later on if the terms are disputed. So no excuses, get this done for everyone working for you. Then think about future recruitment and what sort of employment is going to work best for you that will also be compatible with the changes. Think about the proposed ban on exploitative contracts. How might that affect any 0 hours workers that could gain the right not to be unfairly dismissed? Where do you use seasonal workers, and what can you do to ensure that the workers are getting mutual benefit from that flexibility so it's not seen as exploitative? Next, to go alongside your contractual terms and conditions, you should set out some policies. Again, some of these are legal requirements already. For example, the entitlements to maternity, paternity, adoption, shared parental leave and pay. If they aren't set out in the main statement, then you're going to need to write these down separately in policies, and they're usually quite long, so it's not often that they're written in the actual contract. You should also set out entitlements to other statutory paid and unpaid leave, public duties leave, bereavement leave, etc. There's loads of different sorts now. The new carers leave that came in April. And then set out whether there is any entitlement to occupational pay. So occupational pay is that extra pay that you give above and beyond statutory. You're legally required to have disciplinary and dismissal processes written down, as well as grievance processes. And capability and absent management policies for me are a must too, because strictly speaking, they can also result in dismissal. If you've got more than 5 employees, you must have a health and safety policy. And although it's not stated as a legal requirement, the Code of Practice to support the Equality Act 2010 recommends that you implement an equal opportunities policy. Now, while not having a policy is not unlawful, a tribunal would take a negative view of this should you have to defend any discrimination claims. So to make sure you comply with data protection requirements, you should implement a policy that outlines your rights to process personal data and explains to the staff their rights. So things like, being able to put in a subject access request, process for that. I'd recommend a flexible working request policy that sets out as a minimum a process that's in line with current legislation for dealing with requests. And then if you allow home working, also have a policy that sets out the rules and the duties around that, who's responsible for equipment, bills, insurance, all those sorts of things. I'd then be looking at creating policies to further mitigate risks of legislation changes. So to protect against unfair dismissal claims in early employment, once the day one right is enforced, you're going to need to have really clear, documented, fair processes for dismissing all employees. And it's going to be more important than ever to tightly manage the probationary period. So a specific probationary process set out will be a good idea. As well as having a general policy on equality, inclusion, and preventing discrimination, you might want to embed that in your other policies. For example, a recruitment policy with a statement about making adjustments for disabled people at recruitment, such as, guaranteed interviews for disabled people who meet the minimum criteria of the job. Or you might decide that all recruitment screening will be conducted blind, which is where names, ages, etc. are removed, and that's part of trying to remove bias in the process. You might want to create a menopause policy and have a policy that sets out how you're going to tackle all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment at work, so you can start getting prepared for those things that are going to come in and shake up employment. You can be the one in front. Now, all these policies and procedures are only as good as the paper they're written on if they aren't lived, brought to life, implemented, etc. You and your people managers are the ones who will determine the effectiveness of these. So to start with, they should be communicated out to employees regularly, and particularly on starting with you, so that expectations are set. And then, obviously, if any changes are made. Employees should be consulted on and informed of changes and trained in regard to some of those. So, for example, part of your plan to take all reasonable steps to prevent harassment might be to give all employees anti-harassment training. People managers need to be trained in implementation and also have access to expert advice and support, which is an area where obviously a good HR consultant can help. All processes need to be carried out, documented, investigations need to be thorough. Remember that day one right to claim unfair dismissal means all your dismissals will need to be seen to be fair. Enhanced flexible working rights will mean how you handle requests will come under scrutiny. So let's now take a look at some of the questions you should ask yourself and strategies you might put in place to mitigate risks and take opportunities posed by the new changes. Equality, diversity and inclusion should be part of all employers' people plans. It's good for business. Inclusive organisations attract a diversity of employee and client, and that in itself is great for innovation and growth. Again, it's one of those trust me moments. The research is all out there. Labour are already being seen to put in some extra protections for some groups, and that's likely that will continue. You can increase your reputation, your employee attraction and retention rates, again, so important, and the diversity of your workforce by looking at initiatives to support protected groups, even if you're not required. So, for example, no one's stopping you, even if you don't have 250 employees, creating a menopause action plan right now. Examples of steps you could put in are things like menopause risk assessment, a menopause support group, a trained menopause champion. You could give employees access to an employee assistance program, which will benefit everyone. So while as a small business, you won't be legally required to report on equal pay, your employees will still be able to take you to a tribunal if they've not been equally paid on the grounds of gender, race, or disability. And equal pay is just one small part of the Equality Act. It might be that if unfair dismissal claims rise due to new rights, we also see a rise in attached discrimination claims, particularly if Labour do succeed in making that tribunal system more accessible. So looking at pay then and total reward, by law, equal work counts as, and this is in terms of equal pay law, it counts as like work where the job and the skills are the same or the similar, or work of equal value. So that's work that's not similar but is of equal value. And this could be because the level of skill, training, responsibility, or the demands of the working conditions and environment are of equal value. So think about how you ensure equal pay. So do you do things like conduct job analysis or pay benchmarking? Are you transparent? Do you practice pay transparency? An issue that the one increased rate of minimum wage might cause is that there's this reduced pay gap between your skilled and your unskilled employees. While it's going to be necessary to budget for the extra costs and consider efficiencies, you might also need to mitigate the impact of the shrinking gap. if you can't afford to increase all salaries proportionately? So how else can you attract and retain higher skilled workers? What other benefits do you offer that aren't financial? Why do employees want to work for you? What's your employee value proposition? And, as a small business, there will be some advantages to working for you rather than someone else. So think about what that is, a bit like you would, with your customers. What's our unique selling point? What's our unique employee selling point? So one thing that's fast become the top of everybody's wish list for job candidates, and for some a complete make or break factor as childcare accessibility is reduced, flexible working is up there on the wish list. I'd say it's the one thing that employers fear a lot, and I'm sure there are many who are wondering how they're going to run their business if flexibility becomes default as per the government's promise. I can only imagine that there's a big piece of consultation to be done around this, and I'll of course be keeping track and updating on this and the rest of the potential changes via my newsletter. But currently, the law on flexible working requests is that employers should only refuse them on grounds of 8 specific business reasons. And recently, the right to request became a day one right, although employees still need to make the request and they are limited to 2 in a year. Labour have proposed to make flexible working the default from day one for all workers, except where this is not reasonably feasible. So while it's not yet clear what that will mean in terms of employers setting out what is or isn't feasible, and how they will object to flexibility, I would advise bearing this in mind going forward when you're conducting job design and recruitment exercises. There are loads of types of flexible working. It's not just about home working. So consider them all and the impact they would have on your service levels, etc. It may seem counterintuitive, but I would be proactively communicating what sorts of flexibility can be accommodated, with careful thought given to business reasons for any that can't. Candidates might self-select out of the process if they do not see their preferred flexibility advertised. One of the biggest drivers of the gender pay gap is that women tend to spend more time out of the labour market and work part-time due to caring responsibilities. Now, that's something that's well accepted. Family-friendly policies, flexible working, enhanced parental leave, and additional childcare provision enable more equal sharing of work and childcare between men and women so that both can fulfil their potential at work. Family-friendly policies are also good for business, helping to attract and retain talent and improve productivity. So ensure that your employees are informed of their legal and any extra contractual rights to family leave and pay, and support partners to take paternity and shared leave. Communicate any childcare support you provide and that the government offers, and to encourage more equal sharing of caring responsibilities and reduce the gender pay gap. You can enhance and offer and provide extra support to your employees. Do keep a dialogue open with new and prospective parents about their return to work and their needs, and use paid keeping in touch days to keep them in the loop. Ensure parents on leave are informed of development and promotional opportunities so that they're not missing out whilst out of the workplace. The flip side of the day one right to make claims for unfair dismissal is that employees may no longer feel they need to hang around in jobs that they aren't happy in just because they won't need to do 2 years in a new job to get full employment rights. So we could see a surge in job hopping. And sticking with the hopping theme, you want to avoid kissing a load of frogs and taking on the wrong candidates. And you also want to make sure that you don't miss out on or subsequently lose the right candidates. And this will become even more important. Preparation is key. Work from a job description that's based on an analysis of the job. Be open about terms and conditions like pay, benefits, and options for flexibility so that you're not wasting the candidate's time. Think about how your hiring plan can meet your diversity aims. So you might take part in the Disability Confidence Scheme, for example, and make a commitment to interviewing all disabled candidates who meet the essential criteria. Or you might make candidates aware of Access to Work and use that, which is a government-funded support grant to help disabled employees both to get in work and to stay in work. Recruitment can be a really tricky area. Interviews are notoriously one of the least effective recruitment methods, but they're also the most commonly used because they're easy to do. Well, not necessarily easy to do, but convenient, shall we say. And reaching out to the right people can be improved by using a recruitment agency or a recruitment consultant who can also help you by screening applicants and carrying out reference checks, etc. Because remember, you are going to need to make sure as far as possible that person's right for you from the outset. Do not be tempted to cut corners. Recruitment is very much part of the employment journey. The next and very crucial part of that journey is the onboarding and probationary period. Through this period, you're accruing costs of training, productivity dip, etc., added to the cost of recruitment. And on average, the cost of a new hire is said to be about £30,000. So you don't want to invest this for nothing. Too many employees currently leave their jobs in the first year because it doesn't live up to their expectations. There's some stats here. 30% of job seekers have left a job within 90 days of starting. 50% of employees voluntarily leave in the first 2 years of employment. But after a good onboarding experience, 69% of workers are more likely to stay with the company for at least 3 years. Onboarding and probation is an opportunity to welcome your employee in and get them engaged and up to speed as quickly as possible. What it also is the time when you should be seeking out any problems that need rectifying. And if that doesn't happen, letting the person go. This is going to be so much more important when the 2-year threshold for unfair dismissal claims is removed. So start now by putting in place a robust probationary review framework and carrying it out for every employee. That robust approach needs to continue throughout employment in your management of performance and conduct. Ultimately, if you're going to need to dismiss someone because of poor performance or behaviour, you're going to need to show that you've followed a fair process. And this will apply for all employees going forward, not just those with 2 years service. A dismissal can be found unfair if there was no fair reason for the dismissal, the reason was not enough to justify dismissing them, or the employer did not follow a fair procedure as set out in the ACAS code. So the way to show that your dismissals are fair: have a process in place that follows the ACAS guidelines, use it consistently, and keep records. From conversations, I know that some employers are really worried about the extra cost of paying statutory sick pay from day one of each absence rather than after the 4 waiting days. Now, from my experience, most employers could already be saving on days lost to sickness and unauthorised absences, and the cost is much more than just the pay. So your loss of service levels, your poor staff morale. When a company experiences a lot of absence, it is an indicator that staff are poorly engaged or generally unwell and is work contributing. So without a doubt, absence rates are reduced if they're managed properly, which means keeping in touch with absentees, doing those return to work meetings for every absence, for frequent short-term absence, using trigger points to instigate interventions, for long-term absence, engaging with medical specialists and following a capability process. And then there's proactively, obviously, putting measures in place to support employee wellbeing so that people are sick less or can be helped to recover more quickly. So how do we even start to know what will improve well-being, or whether our family policies are hitting the right level, or whether people are looking for a new job, or why they stay? I'm going to suggest something really radical, and that's that you just ask. So in terms of consultation, formal consultation, currently, depending on the size of business, there might be a duty to inform and consult employees under the Information and Consultation of Employees regulations, the ICE regulations, and that's if you have more than 50 employees. If you've got over 21 employees, unions that your employees are in can apply for recognition and collective bargaining rights. Now, Labour are proposing new rights for unions to access workplaces for recruitment and organising purposes. So employers will need to inform employees of their right to join unions, and they should consider in advance how access to the workplace will be facilitated. There are proven links between employee involvement and organisational success. Again, another one of the trust me points. But I'd recommend that any employer take steps to consult with and involve their employees as far as possible. Some things to get you started, things like town hall type meetings and Q&As, employee forums and working groups, engagement and feedback surveys, 360-degree feedback, giving employees opportunity to feedback on leadership, and opportunities at their regular reviews and one-to-ones to have input and air their feelings. All employers have a duty to consult with employees about health and safety. So, if you've got a few employees, consider creating a health and safety committee. Keeping employees informed and involved can build trust, find and solve problems or find alternative solutions, help everyone feel heard, and prevent disputes. And also, which is really important, improve employee engagement and retention. Now, hopefully, this presentation has given you some insight to the changes coming and the confidence that you can meet the challenges ahead. It all starts with putting good practice in place now. So what are you waiting for? All of Beanstalk HR's clients are kept updated with what they need to change about their policies and procedures as and when. We work with you to tailor your people stuff to your unique business needs. So for SMEs, that can be on a retainer or ad hoc basis. We'll do what works for you. But for small and micro businesses, our HR membership, the pod, is a lifeline. For just £30 a month, you get a free HR essentials audit, access to an HR expert to answer all your HR questions, discounted contracts, policies, handbooks, kept up to date and compliant with employment law, discounted rate on an HR consultancy should you need it, a monthly newsletter and updates on employment law and best practice, and a manual of key HR documents and templates and people management resources. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope it's been of use to you. For more information about Beanstalk HR or the pod membership, or if you've got any questions about what I've just talked about, then please do get in touch.